The signal came in at Aero 347 shipboard time, and every species within 200 light-years heard it. Only one pilot changed course. Kalen Voss didn't hesitate. He didn't run a cost-benefit analysis, didn't consult the Galactic Trade Commission's safety protocols, didn't wait for backup that would never come. His freighter, the Last Chance, wasn't built for rescues. She was a rust bucket hauling low-grade ore between fringe colonies. But she had fuel, she had oxygen, and she had a pilot who still believed in answering when someone screamed for help. The distress call repeated every 90 seconds. Not in any standardized galactic code, just a raw, unencrypted pulse carrying a single word in a dozen different languages. Help. AI, analyze that signal origin, Kalen said, already pulling up navigation charts. The ship's synthetic, a degraded unit he'd nicknamed Echo, flickered to life on the main display. Origin point is drifting at sublight velocity, approximately 1.4 light-years from current position. Sensor ghosts suggest significant debris field. Recommend avoiding. Recommend noted. Plot intercept. Echo's display flickered with something almost like concern. Captain, that trajectory crosses through the Azimuth Nebula. Radiation levels will exceed our shielding capacity by 300% within... I heard you. Kalen's hands moved across the controls, adjusting fuel mix, cutting non-essential systems, routing every spare watt to the engines. How long until we reach the source? 12 hours, 14 minutes at maximum burn. We will not have sufficient fuel for return to any settled world. We'll figure that out when we get there. The Last Chance groaned as her ancient thrusters pushed harder than they had in years. Kalen felt the vibration through his boots. A familiar, almost comforting rattle that said, she'll hold. She always holds. He'd bought the ship from a scrapped-out salvage yard on Titan Station, back when he still had 2 parents and a future that didn't involve running from his own memories. That was 7 years ago. The parents were gone. The future was whatever he carved out of the black. But the Last Chance was still flying. 6 hours into the burn, the comms lit up. Kalen hadn't expected privacy. Distress signals were public by design. Wideband, omnidirectional, impossible to miss for anyone listening. And in this sector, everyone listened. The Karathi Trade Coalition maintained listening posts on every major shipping lane. The Syndicate of Free Worlds had scout ships scattered across the void like hungry spiders. Even the isolated Veth Dominion, who rarely spoke to anyone outside their own kind, kept passive sensors running. What Kalen hadn't expected was the sheer number of responses, all of them saying no. "Attention, unidentified distress beacon," came a clipped, precise voice from the Karathi representative. "This is Trade Master Yelkin of the Karathi Vessel Profit Margin. Your signal does not originate from a registered trade route. We are unable to render assistance without liability waivers and compensation guarantees. Please transmit authorization codes." No response came from the beacon, just the same raw, desperate pulse. "Help." "Unidentified vessel," Yelkin continued, his tone shifting to something colder. "Without proper documentation, we cannot risk contamination or legal exposure. Karathi Trade Law Section 14, subsection..." Kalen cut the channel. He'd heard enough. Other transmissions followed. The Syndicate envoy, speaking through a translator that flattened all emotion into monotone efficiency. Analysis indicates distress source is non-affiliated. Syndicate resources are allocated to member worlds only. Suggest you contact local authorities. Local authorities. There were no local authorities out here. That was the point of fringe space. No laws, no protection, no one to care if you died screaming in the dark. The Veth Dominion didn't even bother with a verbal response. Their scout ship, a sleek dark needle against the stars, adjusted course briefly toward the beacon's location, then corrected and continued on its original heading. Kalen watched the trajectory data on his display. The Veth had calculated intercept, found it wanting and moved on. No malice, no fear, just cold arithmetic. He was the only one still burning toward the source. "Captain," Echo said quietly. 8 other vessels received the distress call within the past 30 minutes. All have signaled refusal. 2 have actively increased distance. "I saw," May I ask why we are different? Kalen considered the question. It was a fair one. Echo wasn't being insubordinate. The AI genuinely didn't understand. Its logic matrices were built around survival optimization, resource management, probability assessment. By every measurable metric, answering this distress call was irrational, dangerous, potentially fatal, and yet, because someone's out there, Kalen said finally, someone who's dying, and they used their last bit of power to ask for help from anyone who might be listening. They didn't ask for authorization codes. They didn't ask for liability waivers. They just asked. Echo was silent for a long moment. That is not a logical justification. No, Kalen agreed. It's not. He pushed the thrusters harder. The azimuth nebula was worse than Echo had predicted. Kalen felt it first as a tingling across his exposed skin, the kind of static charge that precedes a lightning strike. Then the instruments started screaming. Radiation warnings overlapped with gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic interference so thick it was like flying through soup. His display flickered, static washing across every screen. Shields at 43% and dropping, Echo reported. Hull temperature rising. Recommend immediate course correction. Not yet. Kalen squinted through the forward viewport, though there was nothing to see but swirling violet gas and occasional flashes of something deeper. Discharges, maybe, or the light of dying stars reflected through the haze. Where's the signal coming from? Approximately 40,000 kilometers ahead. But Captain, 40,000, we can make that. We cannot make the return trip if we continue at this depth. Shield failure is projected in less than 12 minutes. Hull breach in 14. Kalen did the math in his head. 12 minutes to reach the source, maybe 2 minutes to assess to grab anyone still alive to get back out. 14 minutes total. The math didn't work. Unless. Echo, reroute all non-critical power to forward shields. I mean everything. Life support in the cargo bays, external lights, comms array. Leave me just enough to breathe and steer. Comms array includes our ability to send distress calls. I know. Captain, if we lose comms, no one will know where we are. Kalen smiled grimly. No one's coming anyway, do it. The lights dimmed. The hum of the ship's systems dropped to a whisper. But the forward shields brightened on his display, radiation absorption spiking just enough to buy them maybe another 2 minutes, maybe 3. Every second counted. The debris field materialized out of the nebula haze without warning. Twisted metal, shattered composite hull plating, the unmistakable wreckage of something that had been torn apart from the inside. Kalen swore and threw the last chance into an evasive roll, scraping past a spinning section of what looked like engine housing. Then another. Then a piece of hull with writing on it, not any script he recognized but something angular and old. The beacon is transmitting from the center of the debris field, Echo said. I'm detecting a single intact compartment. Life signs, 1, fading. Show me. The display flickered, resolved into a rough schematic. At the heart of the wreckage, surrounded by the broken remains of a much larger vessel, was a small pod. Emergency shelter, maybe, or an escape module. It was leaking atmosphere. Power fluctuations suggested the beacon was drawing from the pod's last reserves. Kalen guided the last chance through the debris with careful, deliberate movements. His hands knew this ship better than he knew his own body. Every thruster pulse was a whisper, every course correction a prayer. 50,000 meters, 30,000, 15. The pod came into view. A dark egg-shaped capsule, scarred and pitted, with a single viewport that glowed faintly from within. Whatever was inside, it was still alive. 10,000 meters. Shield failure imminent. Captain, I see it. Kalen killed the forward shields entirely, redirecting that power to the grappling arms. He couldn't protect the ship anymore. All he could do was grab the pod and run, the arms extended with a hydraulic hiss, clamping onto the damaged capsule just as the last chance shuddered through the worst radiation spike yet. Alarms blared. Somewhere behind him, something sparked and died. Pod secured. Hull temperature critical. We must leave now. Kalen didn't argue. He threw the throttle to maximum, swung the ship around in a turn that made the frame groan in protest, and punched straight back the way they'd come. The return journey took 18 minutes that felt like 18 years. Every system on the last chance was screaming. The hull temperature climbed past safety margins into the territory of maybe we don't instantly die. The radiation alarms had gone from urgent to resigned to silent, not because the threat had passed, but because the sensors themselves had melted. Kalen flew by instinct, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of normal space ahead, the edge of the nebula where the violet haze thinned into something like safety. Behind him, Echo's voice had degraded to a whisper, the AI preserving power for only the most critical functions. Hull integrity, failing, aft section compromised, oxygen loss. Seal it off. Unable, automation, damaged, manual override required. I'll do it later. Kalen's jaw tightened. Just keep us moving. The last chance broke free of the nebula's edge with a final shudder that rattled every bolt in her frame. The stars snapped into focus, clear, sharp, blessedly radiation-free. Kalen killed the engines and let momentum carry them forward while he assessed the damage. It was bad. Worse than bad. The aft section was open to space. The main cargo bay was venting atmosphere. The fuel reserves were down to fumes, and the pod they'd rescued was still clamped to the exterior hull, its own systems flickering on the edge of failure. But they were alive. Both of them, the unknown survivor in the pod, and Kalen, somehow still breathing in a ship that should have killed him 10 times over. "Echo," he said. "Can you give me a status on that pod's occupant?" A long pause. Then faintly, "Life signs. Stable. Species. Unidentifiable. Biological structure. Inconsistent with known galactic database." "Inconsistent how?" Another pause. Echo's voice, when it returned, carried something Kalen had never heard from the AI before. Uncertainty. "Captain, I do not believe this being is from any recorded civilization." Kalen spent the next hour stabilizing the last chance in the pod in equal measure. He patched the hull breaches with emergency sealant and hope. He rerouted oxygen from the crew quarters to the cockpit, cutting his own supply to a minimum. He jury-rigged a manual airlock connection to the pod, a risky procedure that involved suiting up, venturing into the exposed cargo bay, and physically latching a flex tube to the pod's emergency hatch while the cold of space tried to freeze his joints solid. But he got it done. He always got it done. The pod's atmosphere, when he finally equalized the pressure and cycled the inner hatch, smelled like ozone and copper and something else. Something sweet and organic, like burning sugar. The interior was dark, lit only by the dim glow of failing systems and the soft bioluminescence of... Kalen stopped. The being inside the pod was like nothing he had ever seen. Not because it was monstrous, he'd seen monsters. Not because it was beautiful. He'd seen beauty too, in the cold geometry of stars and the warm curve of a lover's smile. No, this being was different because it hurt to look at. Not physically. Emotionally. There was something in its posture, in the way its limbs curled inward, in the soft sounds it made that were almost but not quite words, that spoke of suffering beyond anything Kalen could imagine. It had 4 limbs, 2 for locomotion, 2 for manipulation. Its skin was the color of deep space, scattered with faint luminescent patterns that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat made visible. Its head was proportionally large, dominated by eyes that held no whites at all, just vast dark pools that seemed to drink in light. And those eyes were fixed on Kalen with an expression he recognized instantly. Fear, desperation, and the smallest, most fragile spark of hope. "Hey," Kalen said softly, lowering himself to the being's level. "I'm here. You're safe now." The being's mouth, a small lipless curve, opened and closed several times. Then, impossibly, it spoke. Not in words Kalen knew, but in a series of tones and clicks that resolved into meaning through some translation effect he couldn't explain. Later, he would wonder if the being was psionic, or if the connection was something simpler, empathy perhaps, or the universal language of pain. But in that moment, all he heard was this: "You came. No one else came. Why did you come?" Kalen thought about all the ships that had heard the distress call. The Karathi with their liability waivers, the Syndicate with their cold arithmetic, the Veth with their silent dismissal. He thought about a galaxy that had decided, somewhere along the way, that compassion was inefficient, that mercy was a liability, that the only rational response to suffering was to look away. "My name is Kalen," he said, "and I came because you asked." The being's luminescent patterns flared bright, then dimmed. Its eyes closed. "My people called me Sithra," came the thought voice, fainter now. "I am the last." The days that followed were a blur of survival and discovery. Kalen learned that Sithra's ship, a scientific vessel of considerable size, had been studying the Azimuth Nebula when something went catastrophically wrong. Sithra couldn't explain what exactly. The memories were fragmented, buried under trauma, and the desperate fight to reach an escape pod before the ship tore itself apart. But the important details emerged slowly. The Sithra's people, they had no name for themselves in any language Kalen knew, only a word that meant "we who remember," had been a quiet civilization on the edge of known space. They had no interest in trade or conquest. They studied, they learned, they kept records of everything they encountered. And they had encountered something in the nebula that had terrified them enough to run. "What was it?" Kalen asked, watching Sithra rest in a nest of blankets he'd arranged in the cargo bay. The being's luminescence was stronger now, paler than it should be, Echo reported, but no longer fading toward death. "Not a what," Sithra replied. "A who, or many whos. I do not know the word. They were old, older than the stars, and they did not want to be found. Old ones, like ancient aliens, like something that should not exist. My people's records spoke of them as myth, warning stories told to children. But the myth was real, and when we found them, they woke." Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cargo bay's temperature. "Woke? What does that mean?" Sithra's patterns flickered with something like grief. "It means they are coming, and I am the only one left to warn anyone." The first sign that Sithra was telling the truth came 3 days later. Kalen had been limping the last chance toward the nearest neutral station, a Karathi outpost called Wayfarer's Rest, 8 days away at their current speed. He'd been rationing fuel, air, and hope in equal measure, trying to figure out how to keep everyone alive long enough to reach help. Then Echo pinged an alert. "Captain, long-range sensors are detecting a mass disturbance approximately 3 light-years behind us. Tracing trajectory. The origin point is the Azimuth Nebula." Kalen pulled up the data. His stomach dropped. The disturbance wasn't natural. It was too organized, too deliberate, a wave of displaced space-time expanding outward from the nebula's heart. Like something massive was moving through the void. Something that didn't care about the laws of physics as Kalen understood them. "Multiple ships are altering course," Echo continued. "The Karathi trade convoy has reversed direction. Syndicate patrol vessels are evacuating their listening posts. Even the Veth Dominion scouts are retreating." They saw it too. "Everyone sees it, Captain. The disturbance is propagating faster than light. It will reach the nearest inhabited systems within approximately 72 standard hours." Kalen stared at the display. The wave wasn't just expanding, it was accelerating. And at its leading edge, barely visible even on the most sensitive instruments, was something that made no sense. Shadows. Not ships, not debris, not natural phenomena. Just darkness. Moving darkness that swallowed stars as it passed. "What are we looking at, Echo?" A long pause. Then, "I have no reference for this phenomenon, Captain. It does not correspond to any known celestial or artificial event. However what? However, it appears to be following the same trajectory as the debris field we encountered, the one containing Sithra's pod." Kalen turned to look back at the cargo bay, where Sithra rested in their nest of blankets. The being's patterns had gone still, Not the stillness of sleep, but the frozen quiet of someone listening to a sound only they could hear. "They're coming," Sithra had said. "And I am the only one left to warn anyone." Kalen realized with a sick certainty that Sithra hadn't meant they were coming to find survivors. They were coming to destroy witnesses. The next 24 hours changed everything. Kalen patched into every open channel he could find, relaying Sithra's warnings, the sensor data, the trajectory calculations. Most recipients ignored him. A few responded with variations of unknown vessel, cease unauthorized transmissions. One Karathi official actually filed a complaint about spam. But some listened. The Veth Dominion, silent until now, sent a single encrypted message. Confirmed trajectory. Kalen sent the data. 10 minutes later, the Veth scout ship that had ignored the distress call changed course and began burning back toward the nebula. Not to fight, Kalen suspected, but to observe. To understand. The Veth didn't believe in acting without information, but at least they were paying attention. The Syndicate of Free Worlds was slower to react, but not by much. Their patrol vessels formed a defensive perimeter around the closest inhabited planet, a mining colony with 80,000 souls and no military value whatsoever. The Syndicate's calculus was cold, but it wasn't cruel. They wouldn't abandon their own. And the Karathi? The Trade Coalition did what the Trade Coalition always did. They issued a statement. "We are aware of the situation and are monitoring it closely. Citizens are advised to remain calm and follow all standard emergency protocols. Standard emergency protocols for an extinction-level event from beyond known space." Kalen wanted to scream. Instead, he focused on what he could control, keeping the last chance flying, keeping Sithra alive, and figuring out how to turn one broken ship and one traumatized survivor into something that could make a difference. "You said your people kept records," he said, sitting cross-legged in the cargo bay across from Sithra. "You said you studied everything you found. What did you find in that nebula? What woke up?" Sithra's patterns pulsed slowly, like a heart struggling to beat. "We found a prison." "Prison?" "The old ones, the beings that should not exist, they were not always what they are. They were something else once. Something that tried to unmake reality. The first civilizations, the ones that rose before the stars finished forming, they fought the old ones and won, but they could not destroy them. So they built a prison. The nebula, not a natural formation, a cage." Kalen's mind raced. "And your people broke the cage. We did not know. The prison was ancient. Its walls had weakened over eons. Our scans, our probes, our curiosity. We thought we were studying a natural phenomenon. We did not realize we were picking a lock until the door swung open." "How many of the old ones were inside?" Sithra's eyes closed. "All of them. Every last one that the first civilizations could capture. They have been waiting for a very long time, and they are hungry." The second sign came 30 hours after the first. The darkness reached the nearest listening post, an automated Karathi sensor platform with no crew, just cameras and scanners, and a transmitter that sent data back to civilization. The platform transmitted for exactly 7 seconds after the darkness touched it. Then it went silent. The data it sent in those 7 seconds was horrifying. Kalen watched the playback on his display, Echo having patched into the Karathi emergency network. The camera showed empty space. Stars, nebula haze in the distance, nothing unusual. Then the stars began to dim. Not one by one, but in clusters, whole constellations winking out as if someone had thrown a blanket over the sky. The darkness arrived not as a wave, but as a presence. Something that bent light around itself, absorbing every photon that touched it. Something that radiated cold so intense that the sensor platform's temperature dropped by 200 degrees in less than a second. And then, just before the transmission cut, the darkness looked at the camera. Kalen couldn't explain how he knew it was looking. The darkness had no eyes, no face, no features at all. But in that final frame, captured in the last millisecond before the platform died, there was an awareness, a recognition. The darkness saw the camera, understood what it was, and reached out to touch it. The transmission ended. Kalen sat in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled up the trajectory calculations again, updated with the new data. The darkness was moving faster than before. Not accelerating, changing speed in ways that didn't make sense, as if it was learning how to move through reality more efficiently. "Echo," he said quietly. "How long until it reaches the nearest inhabited system?" 53 hours at current velocity. But Captain, the velocity is no longer constant. The darkness appears to be adapting. Its speed has increased by 17% in the past 6 hours alone. Projection? 27 hours to the mining colony. 41 hours to Wayfarer's Rest. 6 days to the core systems if it maintains current acceleration. 6 days. Billions of lives. And Kalen was sitting in a broken freighter with no weapons, no backup, and no plan. He looked at Sithra. The being's patterns were dim, exhausted, but steady. They had survived the destruction of their people, the loss of everything they loved, and the certain knowledge that something ancient and terrible was coming to finish the job. And yet they were still here, still breathing, still hoping. "You came for me," Sithra had said. "Why did you come?" "Because someone had to. Because in a galaxy full of cold arithmetic and liability waivers, someone had to remember that compassion wasn't a weakness. It was the only thing that made any of this worthwhile. And because Kalen Voss had spent 7 years running from his own grief, his own guilt, his own failure to save the people he loved. He wasn't running anymore. "Echo," he said. "Get me a channel to every ship within range. Every station, every colony, every listening post. I don't care if they've blocked us. I don't care if they've filed complaints. I want everyone to hear what I'm about to say." The channel opened. Kalen took a breath. "This is Captain Kalen Voss of the freighter Last Chance. I answered the distress call from the Azimuth Nebula. I found a survivor. And I know what's coming." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That darkness you're seeing on your sensors? It's not a natural phenomenon. It's not a weapon test or a cosmic accident. It's an enemy that the first civilizations of this galaxy fought and imprisoned billions of years ago. An enemy that just broke free because we got curious and careless." He looked at Sithra, who had raised their head to watch him with those dark, endless eyes. "The survivor I rescued, their people were scientists, scholars. They studied the prison without understanding what it was, and they paid for that mistake with their lives. Every single one of them is gone except this one. But before they died, they learned something important. They learned how the first civilizations defeated these things the first time." Kalen leaned forward, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less intense. "They didn't win with weapons. They didn't win with shields or soldiers or any of the things we're scrambling to build right now. They won with something we've forgotten, something we've traded away for efficiency and profit and safety. They won because they refused to look away. Because when the darkness came for them, they didn't run. They didn't calculate the odds. They didn't file liability waivers." He let the silence stretch for a moment. They answered the distress call. The response was immediate and overwhelming, not from the governments, not from the trade coalitions or the Dominion councils or the syndicate boards, from individuals, from freighter pilots and mining crew and station technicians and colony farmers, from every person in every corner of the galaxy who had ever looked at the void and wondered if anyone would come if they screamed for help. Vessel after vessel changed course, not toward safety, toward the darkness. The Karathi official who had filed a complaint against Kalen was suddenly buried under thousands of messages from her own citizens, demanding to know why their navy was retreating while a single human freighter pilot was moving toward the enemy. The syndicate patrol vessels, ordered to defend only their member worlds, began receiving unauthorized course corrections from crews who refused to abandon the unaffiliated colonies in the darkness's path. Even the Veth Dominion, so famously isolationist that they hadn't spoken to outsiders in a century, broadcast a single sentence on every channel: "We are coming." Kalen watched the display as icons multiplied, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of ships converging on the darkness's trajectory. They had no unified command, no battle plan, no weapons worth mentioning. They had cargo haulers and mining barges and passenger shuttles, and one ancient freighter held together by hope and spite. But they were coming. Echo's voice, clearer now after repairs, broke the silence. "Captain, I am receiving a transmission from the Karathi vessel Profit Margin. Trade Master Yelkin is requesting to speak with you." Kalen raised an eyebrow. "Put him through." Yelkin's face appeared on the display. Gray-skinned, sharp-featured, with the tired eyes of someone who had spent too many years optimizing profit margins and too few remembering why trade existed in the first place. "Captain Voss," Yelkin said, his voice stripped of its earlier condescension, "I owe you an apology." "You owe a lot of people an apology, but we can start with me." Yelkin's mandibles twitched in something that might have been a smile. "My government has authorized me to offer you full cooperation, intelligence sharing, resource allocation, whatever you need. Why the change of heart?" "Because you were right." Yelkin looked away from the camera for a moment, and when he looked back, his eyes were wet. "My daughter asked me why we weren't helping. She's 12 years old. She heard your broadcast, and she asked me why the trade coalition was running away when one human pilot was flying toward the danger. I didn't have an answer, so I made some calls." Kalen nodded slowly. "Then here's what I need. I need every bit of data your people have on the first civilizations, the ones who built the prison. I need schematics, historical records, archaeological findings, anything you've got. And I need you to send that data to every ship in this sector." "Every ship?" "Every ship. If we're going to fight this thing, we're going to fight it together." The data came in faster than Kalen could process, but Echo was designed for exactly this kind of work. The AI sifted through millions of years of fragmented records, cross-referencing legends and artifacts and half-deciphered texts from a dozen extinct species. And slowly, a pattern emerged. The old ones, the darkness, were not physical beings in any sense the galaxy understood. They were patterns, information, self-sustaining loops of consciousness that infected reality, the way a virus infected a body. They didn't eat stars or destroy planets. They did something worse. They overwrote them. They imposed their own logic on the universe, rewriting physics and biology, and thought itself into shapes that served their hunger. The first civilizations had discovered that the old ones couldn't be killed, but they could be confused. Their pattern-based existence made them vulnerable to something most species had abandoned as primitive: narrative, story. The old ones couldn't process contradiction, couldn't resolve paradox, couldn't survive in a reality that refused to play by their rules. The prison wasn't a physical cage, it was a story. A lie so complex, so self-referential, so utterly impossible that the old ones had no choice but to believe it. They had spent billions of years trapped inside a fiction of their own inability to escape. And then Sithra's people, with their scans and their probes and their innocent curiosity, had poked a hole in that fiction. They had shown the old ones that the story wasn't real, and the old ones, freed from their narrative prison, had resumed their ancient work of unmaking everything. "But they're not invincible," Kalen said, reading Echo's summary for the third time. "If they can be confused, they can be stopped. We just need a new story. A new lie they can't escape." Echo's display flickered thoughtfully. "Captain, the old ones' pattern recognition systems are extraordinarily sophisticated. Creating a narrative capable of trapping them would require—" "I know. It would require something they've never encountered before. Something that doesn't fit any of their patterns." Kalen looked toward the cargo bay, where Sithra rested. "Something like a species that answers distress calls when no one else will." He stood up, suddenly energized. "Echo, patch me through to every ship again. I have an idea. And it's going to sound insane." The plan was simple in concept and impossible in execution. The darkness, the old ones, fed on fear, on isolation, on the certainty that every species, every individual would ultimately choose self-preservation over compassion. That was the pattern they understood. That was the story they told themselves about the universe. Everyone runs. Everyone hides. Everyone looks away. The first civilizations had defeated them by telling a different story. A story about unity and sacrifice and the power of collective action. But that story was old now, worn thin by eons of entropy. The old ones had learned to see through it. Kalen was going to tell them a new story. A story they had never encountered in all their billions of years of existence. A story so fundamentally alien to their pattern-based understanding that they wouldn't know how to respond. The story of a single human pilot who answered a distress call when no one else would. Who flew into radiation and debris and certain death to save one being from a species he'd never met. Who looked at the cold arithmetic of the galaxy and said, no. And then, this was the insane part, thousands of other ships, other species, other beings who had spent their entire lives optimizing for survival, did the same thing. Not because they were ordered to. Not because it made logical sense. But because one human had reminded them that they could be different. That's not a plan, Yelkin said when Kalen finished explaining. That's a philosophy. You want us to defeat an ancient reality-warping horror with... what exactly? Good intentions? I want you to show up, Kalen said. That's all. Just show up. Every ship, every species, every person who ever wondered if anyone would come for them, I want you to be there. Right in the darkness's path. And when it tries to overwrite you, when it tries to make you run, I want you to remember why you came. The Veth don't remember anything, came a new voice on the channel. Flat, precise, unmistakably alien. We calculate, and our calculations indicate that your proposed course of action has a 0.003% probability of success. Kalen recognized the voice. The Veth Dominion scout ship, the one that had ignored Sithra's distress call. Then why are you still on this channel? A pause. Then, because 0.003% is not zero, and because you are the first outsider in centuries to offer us something we cannot calculate. What's that? Hope. The darkness arrived at the mining colony ahead of schedule. Kalen and the makeshift fleet, now nearly 2,000 ships strong, arrived 3 hours before that. Not to fight, to wait. The colony was a small world, barely terraformed, home to miners and their families and the kind of desperate hope that drove people to the edge of civilized space. 80,000 souls, most of them asleep when the alarm went out. 80,000 people who had never expected anyone to come for them. Kalen positioned the last chance at the center of the fleet, not because it was the strongest ship, but because it was the one the darkness had been following. Sithra stood beside him in the cockpit, their luminescent patterns bright with something that looked like determination. They can feel you, Sithra said. The old ones. They can feel your fear. But they can also feel something else. Something they don't understand. What? You are not running. They have never encountered a species that did not run when faced with certain destruction. It confuses them. Good. Confusion is the first step toward defeat. The darkness appeared on the sensors at 0612 shipboard time. No warning, no gradual approach. One moment, the space ahead of the colony was empty. The next, it was filled with a presence that bent light and swallowed stars and radiated cold so intense that the fleet's temperature dropped by 10 degrees across the board. Kalen watched it come. 2,000 ships watched with him. Not one of them fired a shot. Echo, he said quietly. Broadcast on all frequencies. Everything we've got. Echo's voice clear and steady. Broadcasting now. And then Kalen spoke. My name is Kalen Voss. I'm a human pilot from a planet you've never heard of. Flying a ship you wouldn't bother to destroy. A few days ago, I heard a distress call. Everyone heard it. Everyone calculated the odds and decided it wasn't worth the risk. Everyone except me. He paused, watching the darkness slow. It was listening. He could feel it, a pressure against his mind, an intrusion that tried to find purchase and found nothing but resolve. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got tired of watching the galaxy look away. And I'm not the only one. One by one, the other ships in the fleet began transmitting. Not coordinated, not rehearsed, just voices, thousands of voices, speaking their own truths. a Karathi freighter pilot, her voice shaking. "I'm here because my daughter asked me why we weren't helping. I didn't have an answer, so I came to find one." A syndicate miner, gruff and defiant. "I've worked this colony for 20 years. No one ever came when we needed help. No one ever will unless we start being the ones who show up." A Veth scout, flat and precise and somehow vulnerable. "We have spent 1,000 years hiding from the galaxy because we feared what we would find. Today, we stop hiding." The darkness stopped moving. Kalen felt it more than saw it. A hesitation, a flicker in the pattern that had been so relentlessly advancing. The old ones were confused, not by weapons or shields or any technology the fleet possessed, by voices, by stories, by the impossible fact that 2,000 ships from a dozen different species had chosen to stand together against an enemy that could unmake reality. "Now," Kalen whispered. "Tell them the story." Sithra stepped forward, their luminescent patterns blazing brighter than Kalen had ever seen. And they spoke, not in words, but in images, memories, the history of their people, compressed into a single overwhelming transmission that washed over the darkness like light over shadow. "We were curious," Sithra sent. "We were careful. We were afraid, but we never stopped looking. And when we found you, we did not run. We studied. We learned. We understood that you are not invincible. You are not eternal. You are just old. And being old is not the same as being wise." The darkness recoiled. Not physically. It had no physical form to recoil. But the pattern shifted, contracted, pulled back from the fleet's position as if burned. The cold lessened. The light-bending distortion wavered. And Kalen understood. The old ones had been trapped for billions of years in a story that said they were powerful, eternal, unstoppable. That story had been a prison, but it had also been an identity. It was who they believed themselves to be. And now, confronted with 2,000 ships and a single human pilot who refused to run, confronted with voices that spoke of hope and sacrifice and the choice to be better, the old ones were facing a different story. A story that said they were just old, tired, beaten. A story they couldn't escape because it was true. "Keep going," Kalen said. "Don't stop. Everyone, keep talking. Keep telling your stories. Keep reminding each other why you're here." The transmissions continued for hours. Not as a coordinated attack, as a conversation. Species that had never spoken to each other found common ground in fear and hope and the stubborn refusal to die alone. The darkness pressed against the fleet, tried to find an opening, tried to impose its pattern of isolation and despair. And every time it reached out, it found nothing but voices, stories, connections. It couldn't overwrite what it couldn't separate, and slowly, impossibly, the darkness began to fade. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 11 hours. By the end, the darkness had retreated to the edge of the system, a dim shadow against the stars where once there had been a world-ending presence. It wasn't destroyed. Kalen suspected the old ones couldn't be destroyed, not truly, not by anything the current galaxy could muster, but it was contained, confused, reduced from a wave of annihilation to a wounded, retreating echo of itself. The fleet watched it go. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They were too exhausted, too overwhelmed by what they had just done. Kalen stood in the cockpit of the Last Chance, staring at the display as the last traces of the darkness slipped beyond sensor range. Beside him, Sithra's patterns had dimmed to a soft, steady glow. The light of a being who had lost everything but found something worth living for. "You did it," Sithra sent. "You saved them." "No." Kalen shook his head. "We saved them. Everyone who showed up. Everyone who spoke. Everyone who remembered that they could choose something different." Echo's voice broke in, quiet and respectful. "Captain, I'm receiving thousands of transmission requests. Every ship in the fleet wants to speak with you. The colony is broadcasting a planet-wide celebration. The Karathi Trade Coalition has issued a formal apology and offered you anything you need for repairs. The Syndicate wants to commission a statue. The Veth Dominion is requesting a cultural exchange. Kalen laughed, a raw, exhausted sound that turned into something almost like a sob. Tell them all thank you. Tell them I'll answer their messages when I've had about 12 hours of sleep. And tell them... He paused, looking out at the stars. The darkness was gone. The void was just the void again, cold and vast and full of possibility. And somewhere out there, 100 other distress calls were probably broadcasting right now, unanswered, waiting for someone to care. Tell them the last chance is always listening, and if anyone needs help, we'll come. The story spread across the galaxy faster than light. Not through comm relays or data networks, though those carried it too. Through word of mouth. Through the kind of storytelling that had existed long before technology, long before civilization, long before any species had looked up at the stars and wondered what was watching back. Everyone heard the distress call. The story went. Everyone calculated the odds. Everyone looked away. Only the human pilot responded, and because he did, thousands of others remembered that they could respond too. That compassion wasn't a liability. That hope wasn't irrational. That the galaxy didn't have to be a place where everyone ran and hid and looked away. Kalen Voss became something he had never wanted to be. A symbol. But he didn't let it go to his head. The last chance needed repairs. Sithra needed time to heal. And somewhere out there, someone was probably broadcasting a distress call right now, wondering if anyone would answer. So he flew. Not toward glory or fame or any of the things the galaxy wanted to give him. Just toward the next voice that cried out in the dark. Because that was what humans did. And that was why, when the next distress call came, everyone heard it. And only the human pilot responded. But this time he wasn't alone.